Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. Hey, darling. You brought Ella along. How considerate of you, I greeted warmly, reaching out to cradle my 1-year-old granddaughter. Would you like a cup of coffee? I offered. Yes, that would be great, Layla, my daughter replied, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. We had met just outside as I was loading my suitcase into the car. Walking inside together, Layla paused abruptly, her eyes scanning the bare room. Dad, where is everything? What happened to the furniture? She asked, her voice laced with surprise. Keeping my tone steady, I replied, It's all packed away safely. Gesturing to a small box near the door, I added, That's yours. I came across it while tidying up and wasn't sure if you'd want to keep it. Ella squirmed in my arms, eager to explore the vast, empty space. I gently set her down, watching as she crawled away before turning back to Layla, who stood frozen, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. After pouring us both some coffee, I motioned for her to sit near the window overlooking the garden, a favorite spot of mine, though I suspected it might be my last time there for a while. As we settled, Layla finally broke the silence. Dad, what's going on? I gave a casual shrug. I figured you might understand it better than anyone since you're in the thick of it. Isn't that why you're here? To explain things to me gently? I thought it'd be easier if you told me yourself. Smiling faintly, I added, And see, I'm not upset. So go ahead, Layla. This way's simpler. She glanced around the empty room, her voice trembling slightly. But what about all this? This was our family home. Waving off her concern, I replied, We'll get to that. First, I want to hear what you've got to say. She hesitated, then sighed, her eyes clouded with the burden of her words. I think you already know. Reaching out, I placed a reassuring hand on her knee. Don't look so down. Pretend I'm clueless. Start from the beginning. Drawing a deep breath, Layla began. You know how much Mom loves you. She always has. But lately she's felt something's missing. She's decided to take some time for herself. She's gone for the holiday weekend and won't be back until Monday afternoon. She rushed on nervously. When she returns, it'll be like none of this ever happened. She believes it'll be better for both of you. I took a slow sip of my coffee, considering her words before responding. I think you've skipped over some important details. From what you've said, it sounds like your mom's off on a spa retreat. But that's not the case, is it? Layla lowered her gaze, her silence confirming my suspicions. She's gone to meet someone, hasn't she? Her shoulders tensed, and I could see tears threatening. I gently patted her knee. It's okay. Just try to see it from my side. She swallowed hard, attempting to steady herself. She deserves this weekend. We all think it'll be good for her, and for you. Frowning slightly, I replied, She deserves it, huh? So her finding herself is somehow good for me too? She needs this, Layla insisted, her voice quivering. We believe it'll help. I stared at her, struggling to process her logic. So everyone's in on this. Ben too? Supporting her decision to step away from her vows? Or maybe he doesn't know yet. Layla winced, confirming my guess. Kathy and I think it'll be beneficial. For your relationship. I shook my head, incredulous. You know how Ben feels about betrayal. And what about me? What do I get out of this? How does it help me? Layla seemed lost, her confusion genuine. I don't understand, Dad. What do you mean? Leaning forward, I grew more serious. I mean, you've been part of this. You helped your mom reach this point. You've played a role in her leaving me. I didn't help her do that, Layla snapped defensively. And you expect me to deceive her after all she's done for us? She's always been there, every game, every concert. Now she wants something for herself, and you call that betrayal? I sighed deeply. Oh, Layla, you're missing the bigger picture. Let me help you see it clearly. Pausing briefly, I continued. Who do you think set up that dating app on your mom's phone a few months back? It wasn't me. Had to be you. Her face shifted, realization dawning. And remember when she suddenly needed a lock on her phone? First time ever. That stung, We never kept secrets, but suddenly, she needed privacy. I watched as her eyes welled with tears. And those shopping trips, you spent hundreds on clothes and lingerie that never made it home. I managed the finances, Layla. I see the receipts. Her face paled, but I wasn't finished. After she left here, she went to your place, got ready, left her car and phone with you, and now you're here explaining why she needs this break. So yes, you've been more than helpful. Tears streamed down Layla's face. I gave her a moment before speaking again. She nearly left. She told me these past weeks felt like when we were young. Physical, sure, but lacking connection. I won't pretend it was perfect, but I know she's comparing it to this weekend. Layla looked horrified. You don't think it was good, do you? Shaking my head slowly, I replied, the thing is, your mom's never been with anyone else. And neither have I. That's what made our bond feel sacred. But after this weekend, that'll change. She'll have something to compare it to, and that changes everything, no matter what she says. As Ella toddled back over, I lifted her gently and placed her in Layla's arms. And that brings me to one last thing, I said, gesturing around the empty room. A bit of history. Layla glanced up, puzzled as I continued. You know your mom and I met in high school. She got pregnant with you when we were just 18. She was finishing secretarial college, and I was interning. Everything shifted after that. We married sooner than planned because we needed a home for our family. We were lucky, found a 3-bedroom apartment, rough around the edges, but manageable with some help from her family. Just within reach of my paycheck. I softened, my voice tinged with nostalgia. Then, instead of one child, we had twins, you and Ben, and that was the start of everything. The room grew quiet, the weight of the past and present settling between us. In the first year after we settled into this house, it felt more like an active construction site than a place to call home. My gratitude is boundless for Old Brown and the group of skilled craftsmen who worked beside me. Their guidance and expertise were invaluable, helping turn this rough shell into a cozy, welcoming haven. Despite all the hard work, we barely scraped by, living from one paycheck to the next. No matter how many extra shifts I picked up, the bills kept mounting. Eventually, the car broke down for good, forcing us to find a replacement. As the years passed, our priorities shifted. You grew older, and with that came the need for new furniture to suit your changing needs. I'm sure you understand now, living with Ella. When you were old enough, your mother found a part-time role as a registrar at the village surgical clinic, working 3 days a week. Money was still tight, but we managed. Your mother always dreamed of having 3 children, and 5 years after your birth, we welcomed Katie into our family. With Katie's arrival and you and Ben starting school, our financial demands grew. School uniforms that never seemed to last the year, extracurriculars like brownies and cubs, and the added costs of school trips and camps, it all added up quickly. To cover it all, I worked 6 days a week, determined to give you opportunities I never had. Meanwhile, your mother and I saved diligently for a future goal. That plan came to life on our 10th wedding anniversary when we bought the land we now own. To celebrate, I surprised your mother with a weekend getaway at Chester's Hotel in Cirencester. The name hotel alone made Layla's eyes widen. That's right, the very same place where your mother, Patricia, is currently spending time with Floyd Cordetti. Ironic, isn't it? That weekend marked the birth of Gibson Construction, and from there, life took a turn for the better. You kids never lacked for anything. Your mother didn't have to return to work, and she was always there when you needed her. I continued working tirelessly, 6 days a week to sustain it all, which meant missing many of your milestones, while your mother was there for every one of them. This house is still part of the Gibson Holdings real estate portfolio. Since it's no longer our home, I decided to rent it out. Talking with Layla, it felt like we were finally having an honest conversation, though she seemed confused, and I felt exhausted. Are you divorcing Mom? She asked in a whisper. Where will you go? Where will Mom live? This is such a mess. Yes, it's a mess. One that never should have happened, but it did, I admitted quietly. I'm not filing for divorce, but that decision is in your mother's hands. Maybe she'll enjoy her time with Floyd enough to imagine a future with him, though I doubt his wife, Haley, and their 2 daughters would be thrilled. I know, Layla muttered. He says he's single, but he's not. That says a lot. Don't worry about your mother. I've ensured her financial security. She has several housing options lined up. All the details are in a file box, right above the one I prepared for you, with instructions and everything you might need. She'll be fine. The only condition is that if she chooses to live with someone else, she'll need to find her own place. I stood, signaling it was time to wrap up. Layla followed as I gathered Patricia's box of keepsakes and documents. All I've ever wanted is your respect, your thoughts, your loyalty, and your love for everything I've built for you. Since that wasn't the case, I'm leaving for a while. Could be weeks, months, maybe even years. Just yesterday, I officially closed Gibson Construction and retired. Gibson Holdings is still active. We own 40 properties, but I plan to sell about half. Today would have been Gibson Construction's 15th anniversary. I watched Layla, trying to gauge if my words were sinking in. She seemed lost in thought. Today also marks our 25th wedding anniversary, I added softly. I had planned a surprise, a month-long cruise for your mother and me. But since she had other plans, I'm going alone. Fortunately, I canceled her ticket in time for a refund. I guess that's what I deserve, right? Layla could only nod, tears streaming down her face as I helped her secure Ella in her car seat and placed the file box in the back. I've canceled my phone. I don't want work calls, but you can still email me. Please let Ben and Katie know. Not Mom? She asked quietly. No, not your mom. I need time to process everything. I kissed the top of her head gently. Take care, sweetie. Without looking back, I walked to my car, heading for the airport. I didn't want her to see the tears I could no longer hold back. Epilogue. Nearly 3 years later, I found myself parked outside a small church, watching from a distance. Today, Ben was marrying Fiona, a local girl from Fairford he met while living in Oxford. Not wanting to cause a scene, I spoke to the vicar about slipping in quietly. The reception was in Cirencester, an event I funded, ensuring every detail was perfect. Throughout my travels, I stayed connected with you kids through emails and video calls. The girls often expressed regret about how things unfolded before I left. I reassured them, focusing on the future rather than the past. Ben, however, was angry when he learned the full story. Rebuilding our relationship took time and involved confronting not just my past mistakes, but also his feelings toward his mother. Eventually, he forgave her and moved forward. Patricia reached out through emails, trying to explain herself. I only replied to say I needed more time. She admitted she'd wanted to come home that very night, realizing her mistake. It didn't matter how charming Floyd was, she wrote. He wasn't you. But by the time she returned, I was gone. I never missed a birthday or holiday, sending cards and gifts without fail. I even attended Katie's graduation anonymously and was there at the hospital when Layla gave birth to my second grandchild, a boy named Tom, after me. I left a giant teddy bear by his crib, along with a note that read, "Grandpa loves you," and asked a nurse to take a photo of me with little Tom. My journey took me around the world. After the cruise, I explored America and Canada, ventured through South America and the Caribbean, spent months in Australia, and traveled across the Far East. I mostly avoided the Middle East, except for visits to India, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. I wrapped up my travels visiting family in France and spent 3 peaceful weeks at our estate in Lanzarote. It all sounds idyllic, but the truth is, I often felt alone, wrestling with the lingering anger toward Patricia. I wasn't entirely alone. I met some wonderful women along the way, but none stayed in my life for long. When the bride's car arrived, I adjusted my suit, ensuring everything was in place. I'd even bought one for myself when arranging the wedding attire. After a deep breath, I slipped into the church just as the vicar invited everyone to stand for the first reading. Ben had planned to sit beside Patricia, just in case I showed up. I had told him I wouldn't. Quietly, I took my seat. Most people didn't notice me, except Patricia. She reached for my hand, her silent tears filling the space between us. My daughters were bridesmaids. Katie's gasp upon seeing me caught Layla's attention. When Layla recognized me, she nearly fainted, but both were overwhelmed with joyful tears. As the ceremony ended, Ben's smile lit up the room as he walked past, Fiona beaming beside him. She leaned in and whispered, "Thank you." It felt good to be home, This is where I belong, with my family, even if it took me a long time to find my way back. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. I'm not stupid, just a bit slow on the uptake now and then. Technically speaking, I'm a genius by Mensa's standards. I never bothered joining, but I did take their test once, all because my amazing wife encouraged me to. That's really the whole story. I met her back when I was a student at the University of Texas. I was enrolled in the honors program at the McCombs School of Business, and I was also part of Plan 2. Pretty much everyone's heard of McCombs since it's regularly ranked among the top 10 business schools in the country. Plan 2, though, is less well known but far more selective. They only admit about 100 students each year. Plan 2 is a liberal arts program that's been around since the 1930s. The idea is that you take specialized classes that fulfill the general education requirements for the university. These classes form the core of your major. They're taught by the best professors, and the class sizes are tiny. My freshman English course had just 9 people, and it counted toward my major. My American history class had 15 students, and it also fulfilled part of my major. The structure meant that if you knocked out your major requirements in the first 2 years, you had the flexibility to study whatever you liked afterward. Most of us went for a double major. I picked business. Plan 2 prides itself on offering an Ivy League level education, and honestly, it lives up to that reputation. But it's also full of pretentious intellectual types. That's where I met Marilyn. She was smitten with me right away. It took me a bit longer to realize how special she was. It wasn't because she wasn't attractive. She was breathtaking. By Plan 2 standards, she might as well have been Miss Universe. The problem was, I couldn't stomach all the pretentiousness that came with Plan 2. I enjoyed the classes and respected the professors, but a lot of the so-called intellectuals didn't impress me. Many of them seemed downright foolish. McCombs wasn't much better. Everyone was caught up in a race to show off how brilliant they were, constantly bragging about their future careers or how quickly they'd make their second million. All that ego left little room for my more humble nature. Still, I had to attend those faculty gatherings, the teas and luncheons, because that's where you made connections with professors. Those connections were vital if you wanted strong recommendation letters. Marilyn wasn't part of McCombs, but she started showing up at those events along with the Plan 2 gatherings. I didn't realize until later that she'd been doing that intentionally. It wasn't until she came to one of my rugby matches that she really caught my eye. Rugby isn't an official sport at UT, but the recreation department sponsors a club team. We didn't just play against other big schools. We competed for the national title against universities across the country. It was a blast, and all of our girlfriends came to the games. Marilyn had been after me for almost a year before I finally fell for her. Hard. Her hair was the perfect shade of red, and her skin was porcelain smooth. She had such an incredible figure that I skipped a scrimmage the moment I saw her, a big no-no for any player. After we lost that game to Rice, I finally worked up the nerve to introduce myself. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done. Marilyn is 5'1" and I'm 5'3", in thick-soled shoes. My height earned me the nickname the hooker on the team because I was small and quick. And yes, I've heard every joke imaginable about my height and about rugby positions sounding like streetwalker titles. I don't find them funny. Despite being short, I was one of the fastest and strongest guys on the team, not just relative to my size. People have accused me of having a Napoleon complex because of my height, but I disagree. Since first grade, I've made it clear that anyone who mistook my small stature for weakness would regret it. I've always been a solid athlete, as good as someone who's 5'3" can be. That meant I always made the team, but I was never the star player. I never even considered an athletic scholarship. But somehow, Marilyn always made me feel taller, even when she wore 3-inch heels. I loved when she wore heels. They accentuated her perfect feet, but more than that, they showed me that my height didn't matter to her. Marilyn was everything I ever wanted in a woman. From the moment she smiled at me, I was completely hers. She grew up in a poor family in East Texas. Her dad had been injured working in the oil fields and died in a car accident after a night of heavy drinking when Marilyn was in second grade. Her mom worked as an office clerk at a small insurance company. Marilyn earned a full academic scholarship, though I'm sure she could have qualified for financial aid if she needed it. We officially met in the fall of my junior year and got married halfway through my senior year. The only thing we disagreed on was intimacy. I wanted it on our first date. She didn't. I was a virgin, and Marilyn wasn't. Before Marilyn, I was just friends with most girls. I went on dates, but they usually turned into therapy sessions where I listened to stories about the guys they really liked. Sure, I could have settled for pathetic intimacy, but I needed a girl who genuinely wanted me. Marilyn told me she had one boyfriend in high school. She thought she'd marry him until she found out he was cheating. Afterward, she vowed not to engage in intimacy before marriage. That made me respect her even more. She stuck to her principles. Her promises meant something. I knew there were times when she wanted me just as much as I wanted her, but she never gave in. Her strength gave me confidence in her and inspired me to be just as strong. Our first fight that wasn't intimacy-related happened after we were married, and it wasn't pretty. She wanted me to work for my parents. I love my parents. They own 4 franchises in Houston. No, not McDonald's, but you've probably eaten at one of their restaurants or at least seen their ads. Each location brought in about $75,000 to $100,000 a year, so my parents were comfortable. Not Texas rich, but doing well. My dad wanted to expand, but he needed trusted management help. That meant family. By family, he meant me. I'm 4 years older than my sister, and she made it clear by kindergarten that she was going to med school. My dad offered us a great incentive plan, but I wanted to stay in Austin, not just for Marilyn to finish her degree, but because I loved that city. I couldn't stand Houston. I had my sights set on a small tech company in Austin that had just launched. It wasn't Dell, but I believed in their business model. When Marilyn saw the offer they made me, she dropped the idea of moving to Houston. Right after graduation, we bought our first house. Life seemed perfect, but while Dell was thriving, my company wasn't. Before long, I was out of a job for the first time in my life. Luckily, I cashed out my stock options early and decided it was the perfect time to get my MBA. I chose Wharton and finished in 2 years. I landed a great job at one of the big banks in Austin, and life felt good again. I rode the real estate boom in Austin, one success after another. We had 2 kids and lived in a huge lakeside house with his and hers BMWs. But after 10 years of marriage, I realized I didn't care about becoming a multimillionaire, and I was tired of working for someone else. I told Marilyn I wanted to start my own business and invested most of our savings into buying a franchise, the same brand my dad owned. I had never worked in any of his stores, and running one turned out to be a lot harder than I expected. At first, we couldn't figure out why my dad's locations thrived while ours struggled, but we never missed a meal. What I didn't tell Marilyn was that my real passion was writing. That old Plan 2 itch had finally caught up with me. Once the franchise was running smoothly, I spent most of my time in my office writing. I didn't want Marilyn to know about my hobby until I got published. I didn't want her thinking I was chasing some foolish dream. All she saw was that we were making a fraction of my previous income, and I wasn't trying to grow the business. We weren't keeping up with the Joneses, not even close. Dell employees were becoming millionaires from stock options, and we lived right alongside them. Yes, we lived and socialized with a competitive crowd in what was supposed to be easygoing Austin. The unspoken rule was that whoever had the most toys won, and those toys weren't cheap. Long before I started writing, I decided I didn't care about the toys anymore. To be fair to Marilyn, I never discussed this with her. It wasn't a mutual decision, and that led to our next big fight. This tension dragged on for almost a year, turning our home into a battleground. Then, almost overnight, the argument stopped, but so did everything else, the affection, the intimacy. Yet somehow, I didn't see it coming. I'm not stupid. I had always known that Marilyn placed a high value on financial stability, but I truly believed I could support us through my writing. Had I bothered to look up average writer incomes, I might have thought twice, but in this instance, ignorance felt like a blessing. After completing my first novel, I began the tedious process of querying agents. By the time my second book was finished, Responses started trickling in. It wasn't until after my third manuscript that everything shifted. I received the call from a publisher one morning. She was interested in purchasing all 3 books. Even more thrilling, she offered a $30,000 advance for each one. For someone who'd never been published, this felt monumental. I had this small micro-dictaphone I used to record snippets of dialogue before writing them out, and in my excitement, I asked the publisher if I could record her offer. I wanted to impress Marilyn. As soon as I hung up, I called Marilyn, telling her we needed to celebrate. I urged her to hire a babysitter and dress up in her best. We were going to Green Pastures, one of the most upscale restaurants in Austin. Her lukewarm reaction should have set off alarms. She didn't even feign enthusiasm about dining at the city's premier spot on an ordinary weeknight. That alone should have been a glaring warning. When we arrived at the restaurant, a beautifully restored southern mansion, we were early enough to watch peacocks strut across the grounds. We were seated in a cozy, elegantly set room at a perfectly arranged table. I ordered a milk punch, while Marilyn opted for a margarita. All through dinner, I could sense the tension radiating from her. I should have noticed something was wrong, but I was too swept up in my own excitement to see it. I planned to reveal my big news over dessert, but before I had the chance, her phone rang. "We're at dinner." "Are you serious? Right now? Here?" She paused, then let out a light giggle. "No, I told you exactly how I like it." Another pause followed. "I can't. Max, not here, please." She let out a sigh, listening intently for a moment longer before asking, "Are you sure? Just like we practiced?" Her face hardened as she listened. I had the microdictaphone ready to play the publisher's message, but something in her tone made me press record instead. Capturing the moment, she said, "Max, not here, please." "Okay, but you better be there. It won't be pretty otherwise." "All right. I love you too." She ended the call and turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold and dripping with contempt. "I'm leaving you, you pathetic little shrimp. I can't live with a coward, and I won't stay with a loser." But she didn't stop there. "I've been having an affair for 6 months. I hate you. I only married you because I thought you'd succeed, but you're a failure. I'm not even considering joint custody. Maybe I'll let you see the kids unofficially. But honestly, with your genes, they're already disadvantaged. I won't let your small dreams drag them down. I had always suspected that Marilyn married me more for potential than love, but I never envisioned this level of betrayal. Strangely, I didn't react the way she probably expected. Maybe it was because her sudden venomous shift was so jarring. I wasn't going to lose my temper over what felt like a moment of sheer madness. Then it hit me. She was baiting me into a public outburst. I had never been violent with her, but she knew I had a temper when provoked. She was counting on me snapping, especially in a public place. With careful composure, I replied, "Marilyn, I love you. Why are you doing this?" Her face twisted into a sneer, and she nearly shouted, "I tolerated you, you insignificant nothing, hoping you'd turn into someone worth it. I told you I didn't want to be some lower middle-class housewife. You never listened. And don't even get me started on how terrible you are in bed." Years of playing sports had taught me how to stay cool under pressure. I didn't understand why she was raising her voice so much, but I noticed the maitre d' approaching. "Marilyn, keep your voice down or we'll be asked to leave. I love you. I've never cheated on you. And even if you have, I'm willing to work through it. The only thing that needs working out, little man, is how much time you'll get with the kids and how much you're willing to pay." Now she was genuinely seething, her breathing ragged. By staying calm, I was throwing her off balance. She leaned in, hissing venomously, "Are you willing to come home and sleep with me after a real man just to see your children?" Clenching my jaw, I shot back coldly, "Were the kids home while you entertained your real man?" For a split second, she looked startled, then let out a chilling laugh. "Of course. I just told them I found a lucky car when they heard me finish. Marilyn, I know you arranged for him to pick you up. I'm going home now. You can pack your things tomorrow. I won't tolerate this around our children. From now on, we'll communicate through lawyers." Her face contorted with rage. "I'll bleed you dry. It won't make up for the years I wasted pretending, but what else can I expect from someone as small as you? I'm marrying Max. He's 6'2", a pediatrician, and he can give me the life I deserve. If you fight for the kids, I'll destroy you." I quietly stopped the recording. I can't believe you're this foolish. I get that you're after money, but don't you see? A man who cheats with you will cheat on you. He won't care about kids that aren't his, and if he does marry you, I'll bet $10,000 it won't last 2 years. I stood up, walked over to the maitre d', handed him my card, and asked him to process it immediately. I'd be canceling it in 10 minutes. Marilyn had already gathered her things and left by the time the manager returned with my receipt. He recognized me from local restaurant association meetings. Giving me a sympathetic look, he whispered, "I'm sorry." I overheard. "But listen, the best divorce attorney in Austin is dining here tonight. You should talk to her before you leave. She's hard to catch in her office." Still reeling, I glanced toward the table he indicated. A sophisticated woman sat across from an older man who could have been her father. She looked about my age, and I recognized her immediately. She'd represented my friend Esteban Thomas in a brutal divorce, one where she secured everything but the dust under his fingernails. Feeling my gaze, she looked up, her eyes sympathetic, though her posture clearly said, "Don't interrupt my meal." I got the message. I slid my business card onto her table and murmured, "I won't disturb your dinner, but I need to meet with you as soon as possible." She exhaled, exasperated. "I'm very expensive." I nodded, cutting her off. "I know, but my friend, Esteban Thomas, found it even more expensive sitting at the other table." "Do you have cash on you?" she asked cryptically. I rarely carried cash, but when I checked my wallet, I found a recently broken 20. She reached over, took a 10, leaving me with a few singles, and said, "You've hired me. Now go home, keep calm, and don't let her push you out of the house. I'll come by after dinner." I don't like surprises like this. "Do you know who her lawyer is?" I had no idea she was having an affair. I only came to tell her I sold my books. "Have you signed a contract yet?" "No, I just got the offer." "Don't sign anything until I advise you. You don't want that money to become joint property." She turned back to her meal, and I walked out of the restaurant, still trying to process how quickly everything had fallen apart. Eric needed my help. "You don't remember me, do you, Eric?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. I scrutinized her face again. She looked familiar, but outside of Esteban's chaotic divorce, I was pretty sure we'd never directly interacted. Austin isn't exactly overflowing with social hotspots, but it's got its niche circles. Folks in politics and law tend to orbit different worlds than the tech crowd I rolled with. I'd been off the social grid for about 3 years. Though her face stirred something in my memory, her name eluded me. Seeing me struggle, she smiled and said, "I'm Camila Ramirez. We were both in Plan 2 and McCombs. There weren't many of us balancing both programs, so I figured it would click eventually." She took my hand, pulling me out of the restaurant. "Where's your car?" she asked. I pointed to my battered SUV, now sporting 2 flat tires. "Guess they're not exactly playing nice, huh?" "Are your kids at home?" she pressed. I nodded, and without missing a beat, she hustled me into her car and sped like a bat out of hell to my place. Once there, she shoved some cash into my hand for a babysitter and barked orders. Get on the computer, shut down accounts, and move the money into business accounts. Technically, it was still shared property, and draining them could be skirting felony territory, something her lawyer probably wouldn't advise. "I'll hang around for the happy couple to show up," she added. I was wrapping things up when Camila returned. "They weren't as prepared as they should have been," she remarked. "Feels like they rushed it. Probably planned for later, but tonight was too tempting. Leaving the house together was a rookie move. Call a locksmith. Get every lock changed tonight. Disable the garage opener. Do you have someone you trust completely to watch the kids?" She fired off questions like rapid fire. I paused. "My sister's in Georgetown, about a 30-minute drive. She works at the Brown and Green Clinic in Temple." "You trust her?" "With my life." "How old's your youngest?" "Evelyn's turning 3 next month. Josh is almost 5, starting kindergarten this fall. Brown and Green's top tier. What's your sister's role there?" "Neonatal surgery specialist. Just finished her residency at Johns Hopkins. She's got a son Evelyn's age." "Perfect. Call the locksmith now. Think your sister will drop everything to come?" I grimaced. "Let's just say Marilyn isn't her favorite person. She won't get here as fast as you did, but she'll come. And though she won't outright say it, this is definitely an I told you so moment." Camilla's expression softened. That's the kind of drama that keeps me from tying the knot. I've gotten used to it, but hey, would it bother you if I prayed for you? Her sincerity caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw Camilla as more than just an old classmate. She was the real deal. I nodded, a little uncomfortable, but genuinely thankful. I think they'll call it a night soon, she continued. But if they talk to a lawyer, your wife might come back to avoid abandonment claims. I bluffed hard, she admitted. Told them you'd call the cops if they tried to return. Got some version of that from you, but honestly, you can't legally bar her from the house unless she leaves willingly. I tend to crack lame jokes when stressed. You drive like a demon. I'd give half my kingdom if you'd ease off the gas. She shot me a look, the kind of look women seem to master from birth, and ignored my attempt at humor. They're smart but reckless, so I'm betting they acted without solid legal advice. I think I know the slimy lawyer behind this, and no lawyer joke does him justice. If they followed his plan, he'd have been at the restaurant with a photographer. Bottom line, if she stays out tonight, you might have a case for abandonment. My sister showed up, her face a mix of surprise and satisfaction. She threw in a few digs about Marilyn, grudges she'd been nursing for years, and took the kids to her place. The locksmith arrived, swapped out all the locks, and reset the garage opener. Camilla accessed her office remotely from my computer, printed documents, and had me sign them, including her retainer agreement. I winced at the mounting costs. As she was leaving, I handed her the recording of Marilyn's confession. Ever seen a shark grin? It's unsettling, even when the shark's on your side. The divorce was a nightmare and cost me a fortune. Marilyn walked away with more than I thought was fair, but I secured full physical custody of the kids. She didn't even get visitation rights, though I unofficially allowed her to see them as long as she gave notice and didn't leave them at my place. Right after the ruling, I packed up and moved to Ireland. We rented a cozy, secluded cottage near a tiny village on the west coast, close to Doolin, a paradise for traditional Irish music lovers. I enrolled the kids in the local school and found peace in the village pubs. Being a writer has its perks. You can work from anywhere, turning life in quirky places into a tax write-off. It took Marilyn and her new husband's money almost 6 months to track us down. When she called, I readily agreed to send the kids to her, but mentioned we were in the middle of packing for a move the next morning. The furniture was already gone. I told her I'd update her once we were settled. How long does it take to settle in? I figured just as long as it took her to find us again. I hung up, conveniently forgetting to share our next destination. During that time, I wrote a bestseller. It didn't hit #1, but it snagged a spot near the bottom of the New York Times list for a week. The story centered on a pediatrician in Austin, a hidden predator, a despicable character, and one reviewer even called him a classic villain. Oddly enough, Marilyn's husband, a pediatrician, lost a chunk of his practice after my book gained traction. He had to leave Austin, taking a job at a medical school in Lubbock. 3 months later, Marilyn, armed with more of her husband's cash, found us again. We relocated to the wild Scottish Highlands, about 100 miles north of Inverness, near John O'Groats. When she called this time, I apologized for not reaching out sooner, explaining that I had developed allergies and we were moving again. The house was packed, and we were leaving that afternoon. I mentioned we were heading to the Algarve to find a new home. I promised to contact her once settled. As I hung up, I realized I never had allergy issues in Ireland. Plus, they spoke English there. I figured we might try a small town on the south coast next. Being a best-selling author doing local research in remote areas has its perks. Strangers stand out, but locals often warm up to eccentric writers, tipping them off if anyone's asking questions. In Scotland, I had almost a week's notice before Marilyn's people got close. My next book also hit the bestseller list, third from the bottom for 2 weeks. It featured a sinister pediatrics professor from Austin who relocated to a medical school in Lubbock, conducting unauthorized experiments on students that left them infertile and impotent. Coincidentally, Marilyn's husband left the medical school shortly after. He joined the public health service instead. And, by another strange twist, I decided my next book would center on a scandal involving a predatory ex-professor who now worked for the public health service. They say never pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel. Or is it that the pen is mightier than the sword? Meanwhile, I kept ties to Austin. That relentless divorce lawyer began visiting me when I was in Ireland, followed me to Scotland, and then back to Ireland. She was more persistent than Jiminy Cricket. I listened to her endless rants about cases where mothers ran off with kids, cutting them off from good fathers. She never framed it that way, but I wasn't naive. Still, her kisses made my toes curl. After a year, just hearing her sultry hello on the phone was enough to stir something in me. Or maybe it was just that I hadn't gotten laid the whole time. At first, women weren't even a blip on my radar, but something about Camilla resonated in a way I couldn't ignore. What is it about my imperfections that seem to attract women firmly opposed to premarital intimacy? Luckily, Camilla held the same beliefs as Marilyn on that front. Nearly 18 months after my divorce, I found myself back in Austin. By that point, Camilla had finally let her guard down. I was well aware of her deep-seated dislike for Marilyn, but she stood her ground, arguing that my actions were unfair to the kids. She refused to commit to a man she viewed as unethical. "You make your living off men trying to be fathers while their ex-wives run off with new flings to Timbuktu," she snapped. "It's disgusting. And when a man does it, it's just as bad. You've got charm, sure, and I don't care how you treat that woman, but she'll always be their mother." That was an unchangeable truth. Legally, I had all the rights, but was it morally justifiable? She had me cornered, and she knew it. There's nothing quite like that victorious gleam in someone's eyes, coupled with a grin sharp enough to cut glass. I'd like to say I was moved purely by Camilla's moral compass, but maybe it was also her comment about her biological clock ticking and her insistence that her children be born and raised in Texas. I proposed in a castle I rented for the weekend. We exchanged vows in the small church from her childhood, just outside El Paso. As the moving truck rolled up to our new lakefront house in Austin, my phone buzzed. Marilyn. She was crying, desperate, begging to see the kids. Maybe my anger had dulled over time. Or perhaps age was softening me. Or maybe it was the way Camilla's gaze settled on me that made the difference. Whatever it was, I agreed. 30 seconds later, Marilyn was at the door. I wasn't surprised. The chase had dragged on long enough, but she knew exactly who had persuaded me to stop running. When I opened the door, I laid out the conditions. "You'll be under watch," I started. "First, if you speak one bad word about me, I'll be on the next flight to Timbuktu, and you won't see them again. Second, if I even sense you're thinking of contesting custody, we're gone. But if you follow my rules, you can stay part of their lives. I'll even help you rebuild your relationship with them." I made it crystal clear. "You'll be allowed at their games and school events. Do you agree? Yes or no? That's all I need from you." With tears streaking down her face, she nodded and whispered, "Yes." Then, turning to Camilla, she softly added, "Thank you." I can't lie. Guilt gnawed at me over how I'd poisoned the kids against her. I wasn't proud of the cruel words they hurled at her when she joined them in the backyard. Kids have a brutal honesty. But Marilyn stuck to her word, and after 6 months, things settled as much as they could post-divorce. It wasn't easy, but Marilyn transformed. She started teaching kindergarten, throwing herself into motherhood, and never once broke the boundaries I'd set, including staying silent with me. She even seemed content living off her modest salary. The ironic part? It was obvious to anyone who knew her that she was still in love with me. Marilyn needed a strong man to love, and it's a shame she never realized she'd married one. And me? For reasons I can't fully explain, I kept softening. But sharks have a way of persuading you, especially when they flash that signature smile. Husbands, you know the one I mean. Camilla and I are now expecting our second child, and I've come to truly value what an equal partnership in marriage feels like. Above all, I've learned that the love of a strong woman can transform a man. Happiness doesn't even begin to cover what we have. Who would have thought I'd grow to adore a shark's smile? My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.